What's up guys, my name is Abhay Sharma. You are watching Thinking Penguin, and today we're going to create this abstract background in Blender 2.8 with the help of animation nodes. So there are two main parts in this background. The first is the mesh, the geometry that is distorting, which is pretty easy to achieve in animation nodes. The second thing is the lines that's moving on them, and we will be creating a tool out of it so that we can use it in the future as well. So this is a long tutorial, so I have divided that into two parts. The first part, which is this video, is going to be mainly focused on creating that moving lines effect, which we will achieve through spline trim node in animation nodes. And in the second part, where we will assemble everything and create the actual abstract background, so you don't need to watch this tutorial. If you want to follow the second part, you just download the node tree, which I will provide, and you can download this file into if you go into the description, I will give you the link. You can download that and you can start following the second part if you want to. Okay, so let's get started and let's create our moving lines. Okay, so I'm going to create a curve object. So I'll go into curve and create an click on arc, and then I'll give an angle of 180 degrees, which will essentially give me a semicircle. These objects are not available by default. You have to turn on a certain add-on. So if you go into your add-ons and search for extra objects, you will get a add curve extra object, and just turn it on. So now I don't need to see this in my viewport, so I'm going to turn it off. And let's import this into our animation node. So create a spline input node, select the arc, and now we're going to generate this spline. So we'll create a curve object output, and then let's just connect it to the spline, and we'll generate by clicking on the plus button and turn on the spline. And let's just give a little bit of depth, so something like this. Okay, so there are two ways you can achieve this effect. The one is trim spline node, and the second one is the bevel start and bevel end. So if you select the curve object output and go into the end panel, and in the items tab, you will have this property bevel start bevel end. Just turn it on, and you can also use this properties to trim the curve like this. And there is also trim spline node, so let me create that. So trim spline, and let's connect it with the spline, and let's generate another curve object. So curve object output, and let's generate that. Let's give it a thickness, and I'm going to move it aside a little bit so that we can see both curve object at the same time. And now if we select both objects and go into the edit mode, I can see exactly what happens. So if I change the bevel start, you can see how it's affecting the geometry. It doesn't changes the geometry, okay? And if I use the trim spline, you can see it actually changes the geometry, changes the structure of the geometry. It's reducing the points. And for this method, I'm going with the trim spline. You can also use bevel start, bevel end, but so both techniques has its own pros and cons. I'm going with trim spline for this project. Now what I want is, I want this curve to appear and then disappear. So I'll change the value to 1, and if I go to 0, you will see it appears, and then the in value, if I change the in value, it disappears. So basically I want to go from 1 to 0. So let's create a animate float node, and let's change the start value to 1. And if I connect the result to start, and if I change the value of time, you will see that the curve will appear in a certain duration, which is currently set to 20 frames. I'm gonna need the timeline editor, so let me create that. Okay, so now our start value is set. I'm gonna do the same thing for the end. So let me just duplicate the animate float and connect this to end. Now if we want, we can create a an input and connect both nodes or we can chain it if we want. And in this way what will happen is the curve first will appear and then it will disappear, because the second animate float will start after finishing the first one. So that's what we want here. Now we can connect the duration of the both nodes with a single input, because both has same duration. We will change it in the future. So let's set this to 10. And now what I want is, I want this value to be like looping. So right now it's just animating for one time. I want it to loop it over and over again. So for that we can create a float math, and if we change the function to modulo, and let's connect it with the time, and we have to give a value in the B input, either A or B, and the value should be the combination, the addition of both duration. So we can do that by simply multiplying the value by 2. So let's connect this to B input, and right now the value is 20. Okay, and now if I change the value of A, you will see when it passes the value of 20, it actually resets to 0 and start animating again, right? So in this way we can loop this animation indefinitely. Right now my end animation starts after the start animation finishes. What I want is the end animation to start before it finishes the start animation. So to do that I can add a delay time node here, and if I animate this, if I change the value, you will see it actually adding more time, because that's what delay does. What I want here is I have to give the value in negative so that it actually starts before finishing the start animation. So if I add a negative value here, you can see in this way you can control the length of the spline like this. Okay, and we have to subtract this value from the total the final duration. So to do that, first let's create a float input node, right? And let's enter 5, and I have to the value here is negative, so I have to convert this into negative value. And to do that you just simply multiply it with -1 and the value will become negative. You can see that. So let's connect this to delay, and now I want this 5 value to be subtracted from the total duration. So let's just duplicate this node and change this to subtract, and let's add this to the B input, and here we go. I hope it's not too complicated. It's pretty simple. So you can see that what's happening, right? We can easily change the delay value, right? So it's 0, so it's full length. And if you want shorter splines, we can increase this value, and you can see how it affects the length of the spline, right? All right, let's set this value to 0. Okay, so now what we're gonna do is we're gonna control the thickness of the curve. Right now the thickness is uniform. What I want is I want the both ends to be thinnest and the middle to be thickest. So we can use a set spline radius node here, and we can control the radius. We can also control it from bevel depth, but with the radius here we can give multiple values depending on how many points you have in your curve. So to do that I'm going to create a float range node, and the amount is set to 5, so it's going to give me a value from 0 to 4. Okay, so if you want to see how many points we have, we can create a spline info node, right? And if I connect the spline to spline, and let's see how many points we have actually 5 points. And remember, this is changing this I mean, when you use the trim spline, the number of point reduces. Let's just connect the float range to radius. And now if I change the value, you can see how it affects our spline. You can see there is a problem going on, especially when a point is getting deleted on the spline, and it actually gives you a popping effect. So let's just connect the points to, so right now it's 5. Okay, let's just connect this to amount, and it will give you a length. So if you see the output of the length, there are 5 points, and if I change the value, you can see what happens. So let me change that. You can see the points is reduced, and that's a problem that we have to fix. Okay, so but before that, I want this thickness to be mirrored. So we can use a node called evaluate interpolation, which is an interpolation node. And I'm going to use a slightly different kind of technique here. So right now you can see my float range is 0 to 4 because my amount is 5. I'm going to change this to from start step to start stop. So it will give me values between 0 and 1, and it's giving me right now 5 values. And let's just connect this value to our evaluate interpolation, and it will give me 5 values, and it will basically samples 5 values on the interpolation curve, and it will give you basically the same values. But if I use a mirror interpolation here, you will see how this value changes. Okay, so the both the ends will get 0 thickness, and the middle is going to be the most thickest, which is the 1 value, and you can control the overall thickness by bevel depth like this. You can see in the middle there is a weird shape. You can change the interpolation method to make it more smooth. The main problem here is that let me change the values so you can see this problem. So if you change this, you can see what's happening. That's what I'm talking about. That's this weird popping effect, and we have to solve this. And to basically solve this, I'm going to resample the curve. Basically, I'm going to change we're going to generate a curve from this curve. So to do that, I'm going to use a evaluate spline node. So let's delete these nodes, and let's create the evaluate spline node. Let's connect the spline to spline, and now we can generate a curve. So create a spline from points node. Okay, let's connect the location to points, and we should have, and let's change the method to uniform. That's what we want right now. And let's connect this to set a spline radius, and nothing happens because I have to turn on this value. So basically right now it's giving me 50 points. Let me delete this and let me show you from the beginning. So let's just create the evaluate spline node once again, and right now it gives me a single value based on the parameter. Okay, so but I want 50 points, or whatever amount we want. So let's just connect this to spline, and you can see based on this value I'll get that many points. So now I can connect this to points, and let's just connect this spline to spline, and you can see that we get a weird shape, and that depends on how many points you have and how many points you have in the float range. And maybe you want this kind of effect, right? Like dash effect. But what I want is I want the same amount in my evaluate spline and my float range, so it's equal, so it's same, and that will give me a smooth curve like this. And I can change the resolution of the curve from here, so you can see you can use a low resolution curve and also use a smooth spline node, to get smoothness on the curve, but that does not work always. So let me show you. For example, right now it's on a arc, a semicircle. Let's just create a full circle and let's see how it works. So let me hide that, select the Bezier curve, and you can see the ends are not very smooth. So to fix that, you simply have to increase the sampling points, and that should fix the problem. And now if I change the value, it's a smooth curve, smooth animation, right, moving. But there is a problem, and the problem is with mainly the curves with sharp corners. So if I create a rectangle, let's just change this to 3D, hide that, and let's select the rectangle here, and you can see the problem here. So if I change the value, you can see this actually the points are moving. So first let's delete this smooth Bezier spline. We do not need that, and that's a problem that I do not know exactly how to fix it. If anybody knows, please let me know. But right now, how are we going to fix that? We're just simply going to increase the number of samples, and we will increase until it's almost unnoticeable. So that's what I'm using right here, but maybe there is a simpler solution for that. This is so high. Let's change this to 50. Okay, so that's our that's the basic functionality of this tool. Okay, so now I'm just basically going to convert this into a node group. So before that, let's delete unnecessary nodes, or if we can somehow optimize it, we will optimize it. So here you can see that we do not need the set spline radius because we have the same attribute on spline from points, so we'll basically get the same value. And I'm gonna move this resampling input to here, so all inputs are at the same place. Okay, what else we can do? So let's just test the values. So before converting it into a group, let's see everything is working perfectly. Okay, all right, so let's move this closer a little bit, and let's rename the node tree to something meaningful, because when you append the node tree into another Blender file, this is very helpful. So before converting it into a group node, I suggest you should save this file into a separate Blender file where you can go and see exactly what's happening in the node tree, because when you convert this into a node group node, it becomes slightly confusing. Okay, so let's convert this into a group node. So go into the add menu, subprogram, and create a group. Let's rename this group to spline trim animate. Okay, let's create the output node and let's move it here. I'm gonna delete the curve object, we do not need it, and we'll output the spline object here. So let's connect the inputs. So the first thing is going to be the spline input, so let's connect this here, and we're gonna need the this modulo value, the a value. So let's set this to whatever default value you want to set it, and then connect it to the group input. Let's change the name to something meaningful. I'm using value, don't follow me. Give a proper renaming so that you can understand. Okay, now the difficult part, I have to connect the duration here, and we have to properly connect it, otherwise. So this is going here, so let me connect the duration to here because I'm multiplying it with 2. Now we need the delay, so delay, connect it here. Actually it needs to be connected to this negative node, negative multiply by -1, and then connect it delay here. So I hope it's not, it is confusing, and I will check it before making it a final tool. So let's add a integer value, now rename it to sample, and we're gonna connect it with the amount in evaluate spline and the same value in the float range. Alright, and delete this float input. What else we need? We may want the mirror interpolation as a option, so we can simply use a boolean node, switch node actually. And if I connect the interpolation to if true, and let's connect the output to interpolation, and now we can use this boolean value as an option. So let's just rename this to mirror. So that's it, I think. So let me just see if it is connected properly. So the delay is being multiplied by -1, duration is multiplied by 2, and we are subtracting the delay from it, right? Okay, I think it's I think it's right. There's no problem here. Okay, so if I so you can see how it becomes slightly confusing, because there are so many connections coming from. Okay, so if I invoke the subprogram, you can see how it will look like. And I want to show you one more thing. So if you can select the group input node and go into the end panel, select the item, you will have all the attributes here mentioned. And if you want to if you want to change the order, you can select it and move it up or down. And for the default value, go into nodes, advanced node settings, and these are the default values. So let me set the resample to 50, and I want the mirror by default turned on. And I think that's it. So let's just save the file, and let's create a new node tree here. And let me delete all these nodes, all these objects. So delete that. Okay, so let's create our node, that the tool that we have created. For that, you go into the subprogram menu and just create spline, trim, animate. So this is our tool, and we select our arc spline, and let's create a curve object output. Curve object output, right, generate the curve, give it a thickness, and you'll see by default the mirror is turned on, and you can see, you can change the values and see how it's affecting, right? So if I turn off the mirror, this is how it's gonna look like. All right, let me create a time info node. Let's connect this to value, and if I play the timeline, you can see how it's animating. The delay is set to -5, which I think is wrong. I should have set this in the default value, but doesn't matter. Let's change the delay to 10. Let's change the delay to 5 and see how it looks. I think everything is working fine, so we can move on. So I'm gonna delete everything. And alright guys, thank you so much for watching this video, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.